All right, welcome back to another weekly tech tip. So last week I talked about NAS versus SANs, where this week I'm actually going to take you over to my desk. I'm going to give some fun facts about iSCSI and how it works, where it came from, but then I'm actually going to walk you through a tutorial on how to set up multiple iSCSI LUNs per target. And we're going to do this with ZFS, and we're also going to do this with LVM, or Logical Volume Manager. So let's head over to my desk now. Alright, welcome to our little iSCSI LVM tutorial here, and this is just a quick rundown of what this tutorial will consist of. So first we're going to talk about iSCSI, then we'll talk about LVM, then we're going to talk about how we're going to create our iSCSI LUNs, then we're going to give a little information on the environment that we're running and what you're going to need to install, then we're going to get right into the tutorial. Alright, so just to start off, iSCSI stands for Internet Small Computer Systems Interface. And what it is it's a transport layer that works on top of TCP that allows for block level iSCSI data to travel between the iSCSI initiator and the iSCSI target. Now the nomenclature for iSCSI can be a little bit confusing because iSCSI target is actually the server that hosts the iSCSI LUN, whereas the initiator is the machine that is looking to use the iSCSI drive in its system. So there are hardware and software implementations of both of these, but for the purpose of this tutorial, we're only going to be talking about the software. Alright, so next we'll talk about LVM quickly. So LVM stands for Logical Volume Management, and if I was really to go in depth on LVM, I really could be here for a really long time. So for the purposes of this guide, what we're going to do is we're going to take a high-level look of what it is, why it's handy for small and large deployments, and then most importantly for this guide, just how to leverage it for the use of SCSI. So LVM allows for a higher level view of disk storage than what traditional partitioning would, and this gives the admin much more flexibility in allocating storage for users and applications. One extremely beneficial point to LVM is that it gives the ability to resize volumes and move them around nearly at will. So for a single user, when working with your Linux desktop, LVM can come in handy most obviously by not locking you into completely rigid partitions for different parts of your machine, such as if you partitioned a certain amount of your storage for your home directory when you first began using your machine, and then the time comes, let's say down the road, where you're quickly running out of space in that directory. LVM could allow you to shrink some of your other partitions that aren't getting as much use, and then resize your home directory as you need to see fit. So in a larger environment, however, this is where LVM is extremely handy, and you can allocate user groups to specific volume groups and logical volumes. These can then be grown and shrunk as needed. So this allows for the admin not to have to over-provision storage where it's not needed. It also allows a quick addition of new storage to grow to your logical volumes as required. Alright, now that that's out of the way, let's quickly talk about how we're going to create our LUNs for our iSCSI target. First, we'll build a small RAID to give us some redundancy. And it should be very clear here that while you can add multiple disks into a volume group with LVM, this does not give you any type of data redundancy. So it's best to create your RAID arrays and then add them to your LVM volume group. So after we set everything up with this method, I'll show you how this can also be done with ZFS and ZVols instead. And so while LVM is a volume manager and MDADM is a Linux RAID tool, ZFS itself is a file system, volume manager, and RAID tool all in one. Alright, so let's get into our environment information. So what we're running here on this server is CentOS 7.7, and the things you're going to want to have installed to follow along this if you want to is Linux RAID or MDADM. You're going to want target CLI for your iSCSI target, and then if you want to use ZFS and their ZVols, you're also going to want to install ZFS, and you can find the repo for CentOS right here. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so I already have everything installed that I'm going to need for this guide. The only thing I haven't done yet is add a firewall exception for the port that iSCSI runs on. So I'm going to do that right now. Alright guys, so for the first command I'm going to run a firewall cmd, and we're going to make this permanent, and we're going to add port 32600, which is the port that iSCSI is going to run on. There we go. So that's in the firewall table now, and it'll stay there. So just to make sure, we're going to run a firewall cmd reload. There we go. Okay. So our next step is to build our RAID arrays that we want to have as our underlying redundancy profile underneath our volume group and our physical volumes. So first things first is we're going to create our Linux RAID. So let's take a list block. So we'll take a look at all of our block devices. So we see here we have all these to work with. I've created these ahead of time, and they're only 10 gig each. So the best way to first, before going ahead and building your RAID, is making sure that there's no super blocks on these block devices already. So we could run a md80m examine, and let's go SD, let's go B. Alright, so we'll check these ones out. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's do 8 disks. There we go. Okay, so we have no superblock detected on any of these devices. That's great. So I think what we'll do is we'll create 2 small RAID 5s, and we'll add those into our LVM. So first things first, we'll go md80m, create, and we're going to give it a name, so let's just call it MD0 for our first RAID array. And we want a RAID 5, and we want 4 devices in each. And so we'll go SD E to E. There we go. So our array is started, and now we're going to create one more, and we're going to use F2I, right? Oh, that's the same name. We don't want to keep it the same name, obviously. So we'll give this one MD1. All right, here we go. All right, so let's just run a cat proc MD stat. And here we go. We've got our MD0 and we got our MD1. And they're both RAID 5s and they both have 4 drives. Okay, so the next step is to create physical volumes with these 2 RAID arrays. So let's go pv create, and this is now using LVM. So pv create dev md0. Okay, physical volume created, and now we'll do the same thing for our next RAID array. Fantastic. Now we have 2 physical volumes which make up of our 2 RAID arrays. Now we're going to group them together in what's known as a volume group. So we're going to do a vg create, and we can call it whatever we want here, but since we're using we're setting this up for iSCSI, let's just call it iSCSI volume or iSCSI group. Okay, and we want MD0, MD1. Fantastic. All right, we have our group created. All right, so the next step in this is to set up our logical volume. So this is a way for us to partition whatever size we want for our what are eventually going to be our iSCSI LUNs. And there's a few different ways you can do this. You can actually do it by size. So you would do an LV create, and you just, let's say we want 50 gigs. You would do 50 gigs. Or you can actually do it by percentage method as well. So you want 40% of the entire volume group, then you can do it that way. Just to keep it simple for this guide, we're just going to use the actual sizes. So let's create our first one, LV create dash large L, and let's do 30 gig. And now what's the logical volume name? Let's say iSCSI disk 1, and our volume group name is iSCSI group. There we go. So our first disk is created. Now let's create a second, and let's give it a different size. Let's give this one 20 gigs. Great. All right, and let's just do one more. And maybe this one will be 10 gigs, and we'll call it iSCSI disk 3. Oh, looks like we used all our free space. Okay, well, maybe, I wonder if we can get 5 in there. Yeah, we got 5. Okay, so now we have 3 logical volumes created. And eventually these are going to become our LUNs that we're going to use for target CLI. Alright, so the next step is to head over into target CLI, and essentially target CLI is its own command line interface for iSCSI. So we just write target CLI, and there we go. Now we're inside of it. So our first thing that we want to do is we want to go into the backstores, and we want to start creating backstores for our iSCSI target. So we'll go cd backstores block. So we want block devices. Alright, so now comes the point where we're going to start creating our iSCSI disks. So let's just try again. We'll just name it create iSCSI disk 1, and then we'll go dev iSCSI group, which is the volume group name, and then the logical volume that we named it, which is iSCSI disk 1. There we go. So we created the first one. Now we're going to go back in, we'll create 2, and we'll use disk 2, and finally we'll do 3 with our disk 3 that we created. Fantastic. Okay, so now we're going to go back to root. Alright, we're back in the root directory. So now we're going to change directory to iSCSI. Alright, so from this point, this is where we're going to create our iSCSI name for our target. Now, iSCSI has some pretty different naming conventions, something you may not be used to if you've never worked with SANs, but it's very similar to the WWN, their worldwide names that Fibre Channel uses. And so it's essentially called an iSCSI qualified name. And the format takes an IQN dot year, month, and then whatever your naming authority is. But essentially, if you're keeping this within your network, you can really use whatever you want. So let's just make it fun and keep it simple. So let's just call ours create, let's get back in the terminal here, create IQN dot, well, it's 2019 or 2020, so 2020, and it's the second month. And let's call us, the second month, and then let's call it 45 derives dot CentOS and test. There we go. So we've created our target name. Now the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to go into the ACL list. So let's go cdiq, throw that into our name. And then we're going to go TPG1 and then into ACLs. There we go. So this is where you're going to want to have the initiator name of the machine you're looking to connect your iSCSI to. So for example, for this guide, we're going to connect with this Windows machine. So we'll open up the iSCSI initiator, and this is how you're going to connect eventually to the iSCSI target. But essentially what you want to do is you want to come into your configuration and you want to get your initiator name here, because you want to add this to the ACL list. So we're going to come in, we're going to copy this, and let's just move it away for now. Alright, and so now that we're in the ACLs, we're just going to type create, and we're going to copy that name that we just had, and there we go. So now let's get out of there, and now we want to go into LUNs. There we go. So these are the LUNs that we're finally going to create out of the iSCSI disks that we created previously. So we're going to run create /backstores /block, and then look, so we already have tab completion. We've got iSCSI disk 1, and let's do 2, and let's do 3. So that's going to give us multiple iSCSI LUNs for this one single target. Alright, so now that we have everything here and we're just doing an LS to make sure everything's showing up as it should, we've got our block, we've got our iSCSI disks showing up where they should in the LUNs, we have our iSCSI initiator and our ACLs, and we have our target set correctly. So now we're just going to exit, And there we go. So global, it's auto-saved. And there we go. So last 10 configs have been saved. And now we're ready to test it out. But first, let's just run a systemctl restart target.service. And if you didn't, you're also going to want to run an enable just so it runs at startup. Alright guys, I must apologize. So at the beginning of the tutorial, I set the wrong port. It was 3260, not 32600, and that was a mistake on my end. Sorry for that. So now we want to pick up where we left off, and what we want to do is we want to connect to our iSCSI target now. So we have our Windows machine here, and we have our iSCSI initiator set up, and so the easiest way to do it is just do a quick connect. Now, if you have Windows Defender Firewall on your machine and it's running, it may block this. So you may want to go in and create a custom rule for port 3260 to allow. But okay, so let's check this out. So we're going to do 192.168. Let's just ensure our IP address here. And it's 104.103, okay. 104.103, and let's see if it picks it up. Okay, so there we go. We've got our 45 drive, CentOS test, and it's connected. All right, so fantastic. So it's connected. Now, let's see if the disks are showing up. So we come into Windows and we go Disk Manager. And let's take a look-see. And look at that, just like that. We get 3 new disks showing up in our Disk Manager at Windows, and we want to initialize them so they can get a look at them. And as we see here, we've got 29 or 30 gigs, 20 gigs, and we've got our little 5 gigs. So that's great. It worked just as it was supposed to, and with a little bit of mess ups on my end, but we got there. It's crazy how one little button press can screw things up sometimes, so you have to be extra careful, unlike me. Alright, great. So now that that's out of the way, we have that all set up. I did say what I was going to do is I'm going to show you how to use ZFS for this as well, and there's evals. So I think to keep it brief and to essentially, I've already shown you how to set everything up. Now I'm just going to show you how you would go about using a ZFS zval in place of LVM and their logical volumes. So let's just start that now. So let's get this out of the way. We can still remain connected. That's no problem at all. Alright, so let's just clear all this and let's take a look at our block devices. Okay, so we've got all of our disks here that are in our iSCSI group and our volume group. So we've got a few disks left though. We've got J, K, L, and M. So let's make a quick ZFS pool out of those. So let's go zpool create, and we'll call it tank. And let's do a RAID Z1, and we're going to go device J to M, right? Okay, looks like that worked. So let's go with zpool status. Perfect. So we have a RAID Z1. Great, so that works. We've got a RAID Z1 that's made up of our 4 drives here. And let's just see if it's mounted. So, alright, so there we go. We've got tank mounted right there. Okay. Alright, so I'm just going to run our ZFS list and take a look at what's available here. Alright, so we got 28 gigabytes available to us. So let's just make one quick zval. So this is essentially ZFS's way of creating block devices. So it allows you to break a chunk of a block device off of the actual ZFS array. And so the command to do that is ZFS create -v for volume, and let's just say 15 gig to keep it nice and easy, and we'll go, it's obviously tank is the mount point, and we're going to call this ZFS zval1. Alright, now that that's created, let's clear this out, keep it a little easier. Okay, so from here on, let's just do a quick ZFS list, and we can take a look. We've got there, it's our zval there. So now we're going to go into target CLI again, and as you can see, we're in here. We're in backstores and block where we should be. But if you're not there, you just run cd backstores block just to get where you want to be. So this is where you're going to create your device that's going to be converted into an iSCSI LUN. And now from here, now this isn't an LVM and it's not a physical or a logical volume like the other ones were. This is an actual ZVol. So the command is slightly different, but still very similar. So we're going to run create, and this time let's call it iSCSI ZFS just because so we can know what it is. And now the path is going to be slightly different as well from the other one. So dev, and tank was the name of our ZFS file system, remember, when we created it. And then finally, all that's there is ZFS vol1. And so there we go. So we've now created one more block storage object for target CLI to use. And now we could go in there, create it as a LUN again, which we can quickly do that. So essentially, we're going to back out, and let's go cd. Yeah, iSCSI, IQN. There we go. And then we're going to go to LUNs, right? TPG and LUNs. All right. So now we're in the LUNs. Now we're going to create. And we know where it's at, where it's back stores, and it's in a block. And what do we have? We have iSCSI ZFS, and there we go. So our LUN is mapped there as it should be. Now let's exit. There we go. Now it's saved. Now, it's not showing up here yet, but let's take a look in our target CLI, iSCSI initiator rather, sorry, and let's disconnect from it. Okay, let's try to connect now. Connect into it. Now let's go over. And there we go. We have a fourth that is uninitialized, but there it is. We've got our 15 gigabytes of storage there. And so this is ZFS, ZVol, and the rest are all used with LVM. All right, guys. Well, hopefully you found some of this interesting, and hopefully it helps some of you out understand how LVM works and kind of the ways in which ZFS is able to handle kind of what RAID array and a volume manager and a file system does all in one instance, and that's kind of why we love ZFS so much here. But it also kind of gave you an overview of how iSCSI works and how you can connect to a Windows machine with some Linux iSCSI volumes or LUNs. All right, guys, thanks very much. All right, so hopefully that was a bit of an informative tutorial and an explanation of how iSCSI works. And now you know a little bit more about how you can share block devices over a network and how the iSCSI protocol works as a whole. So stay tuned for sure, because we're going to keep doing little tutorials like this. I've done NFS so far, this was iSCSI, and in the future I plan on setting up a nice SMB tutorial. So definitely check back for that. So thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you again on the next week's Tech Tip.